Wyoming, 1887. Samuel Whitmore had built everything he had with his hands and his word. 40 years of work, the kind that starts before sunrise and doesn't apologize for it. He had come to Wyoming when it was still territory, with a horse and a bedroll and the stubbornness of a man who has decided that a piece of land is going to be his, whether or not it agrees yet. He had built the ranch acre by acre, herd by herd, fence post by fence post, until the Whitmore operation was the largest in the valley, and the name meant something in 3 counties. 65 years old now, the doctor in Laramie had told him, quietly, that his heart was not going to carry him another decade. Perhaps not another 5 years. Samuel had nodded and thanked him and ridden home and gone back to work. There was one thing left to do. Not the ranch was in order. Not the money was accounted for. The one thing left was Abigail, his daughter, 20 years old, with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubbornness, and a laugh that left every room better than it found it. She deserved a man whose character would outlast his money. Samuel had been watching the candidates for 2 years, the sons of prosperous ranchers with good boots and easy smiles, cowboys who arrived with reputation and stories, all of them fine in their way, none of them right, in the specific way he needed right. Then one afternoon he watched Luke Walker, 28 years old, a ranch hand on the Whitmore operation for 3 years. Luke had not been asked. He had simply stopped, cleaned the cut, wrapped it, and gone back to work without mentioning it to anyone. Samuel had seen it from the porch. He stood there for a long time afterward. And he began, quietly, and without telling anyone, to watch. Luke Walker had come to the Whitmore Ranch 3 years ago with a horse, a saddle, and a reputation for working harder than anyone who hired him expected. He had grown up in the eastern part of Wyoming, the hard part, where the land offered nothing easily, and the winters came early and stayed late. His father had been a decent man who worked a small claim and never got ahead of it. His mother had died when Luke was 12. He had been working since he was 10. He was good with cattle, the specific goodness that comes from paying attention rather than from being told. He could read a herd the way some men read weather. He was good with horses, too, in the quiet way of someone who understood that trust is built in small moments and destroyed in one. He was honest. This was the thing about Luke Walker that was hardest to explain and easiest to see. He was honest, the way some men are tall, not because he had decided to be, but because the alternative had never seriously occurred to him. He returned things that weren't his. He told the truth when lying would have been simpler. He acknowledged mistakes before anyone asked. He did not think of these things as virtues. He thought of them as how you were supposed to be. He was also acutely aware of what he was not. He was not rich. He was not a landowner. He was not the kind of man who could present himself to Samuel Whitmore, who owned more cattle than Luke had ever seen in one place.
Entire year since he had understood, with the quiet certainty of a man who does not romanticize things, that he had fallen in love with Abigail Whitmore. He had not told her. He had not told anyone. He kept his distance with the discipline of a man who knows the difference between what he wants and what he has any right to pursue. He went to work every morning and did his job and watched her from across the yard the way you watch a horizon, something that gives you direction without ever being something you reach.
Abigail Whitmore had grown up knowing that the ranch was her father's life. Not in the abstract sense, in the concrete, daily sense of a girl who had learned to ride before she could read, who had helped with calving since she was 8, who understood the economics of a cattle operation with the knowledge of someone who had been listening at the dinner table for 20 years. She was not a decoration on her father's success. She was part of it. She had also, over the past year, begun to understand something about Luke Walker. Not gradually, suddenly, the way these things sometimes arrive. She had been watching him work the north pasture on a morning in October when she understood that she had been watching him for months and had only just admitted it to herself. She noticed that he kept his distance. She noticed that he did not seek her out, did not find reasons to be near her, did not do any of the things the men who came calling did. He was respectful and professional, and the distance was completely deliberate, which told her something about him that she had not known before. He was aware of what he was not, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. She found this considerably more interesting than men who pretended. She was her father's daughter. She valued honest accounting, in ledgers and in people. What she also knew, and had been at the upstairs window, he had not known she was there. She had thought about that moment many times since, not because it was grand, because it was small. A small, true thing done without an audience. And she had understood, standing at that window, that small, true things done without an audience are the only reliable measure of a person's character. The first test was the money. Samuel left $30 on the tackroom table, arranged carelessly, as if dropped and forgotten. A significant sum, the kind a man working for wages would notice. He told no one. He watched from the gap between the stalls. Luke found it on a Tuesday morning. He stopped, looked at the bills, looked around the tack room, picked them up and counted, $30 exactly. Stood for a moment. Then he went to find Samuel. "Mr. Whitmore, I found this in the tack room. Looks like it was dropped." Samuel looked at the money, then at Luke. "Thank you," he said. "I must have dropped it yesterday." Luke nodded and went back to work. Samuel stood on the porch and looked at the $30. He had not dropped it. He put the money in his pocket. He went inside and sat at his desk and opened the small leather notebook he had started keeping, his precise rancher's hand recording everything he observed about Luke Walker. He wrote one word: honest. Then he closed the notebook. The tests had barely begun. The second test was the horses. Samuel had 3 personal horses, his best animals, worth more than most men earned in a year. On a Thursday in April, he told Luke to exercise the bay, alone, at the pace it needed. He cleaned the tack afterward without being asked. Samuel wrote in the notebook, "Careful with what is not his." The third test was the cattle sale. In May, he sent Luke to Laramie with 40 head of prime stock, the written valuation, and the authority to negotiate on behalf of the Whitmore ranch. Luke came back 3 days later and laid out the documentation and the money on Samuel's desk, every dollar accounted for, the price negotiated above the minimum Samuel had set. 42 head, Luke said. Henderson's man tried to move me to 38. I held at 40. Samuel looked at the documents, then at the money, then at a folded piece of paper Luke placed beside it. "Expenses," Luke said. "Feed and lodging. I wrote down everything." The accounting was precise, every item listed. "Did you write this on the road?" Samuel said. "Each evening," Luke said. "Seemed right to keep track." Samuel looked at the expense accounting for a long time. Then he put it down. After Luke left, he opened the notebook. He wrote, "Accountable to the last dollar. Keeps records not because he has to, because it's right." He sat at his desk and looked at the money and thought about his daughter. The fourth test was the north fence. 3 miles of line across terrain that had defeated 3 previous attempts. Rocky, uneven, the kind of ground that fought fence posts the way it fought everything, stubbornly and without apology. Every man who had tried it had come back and said it couldn't be done right with standard materials. Samuel sent Luke, alone, with standard materials. Posts set at the angles needed for the rocky soil, the wire tensioned correctly, everything plumb. It was not fast work. It was correct work. At the far end, a small pile of leftover materials, wire and posts that hadn't been needed, with a note in Luke's handwriting. These were left over. Didn't use what wasn't needed. Samuel sat on his horse and read the note. He folded it and put it in his pocket. He rode back slowly. He was 65 years old, and his heart was doing what the doctor had warned him it would do, and he had ridden a long way to look at a fence. He did not regret it. He opened his notebook that evening and wrote the last entry. Finished what 3 men said couldn't be finished. Left a note about materials not used. This is the man. He closed the notebook. He had been looking for 4 months. He had found what he was looking for. I want to stop here for just a moment. Because what Samuel Whitmore is doing right now is the most serious thing a father can do. He is not asking who has the most money or the best land. He is asking who this young man is when nobody is watching. And that question, that specific question, is the only one that matters. Most of you listening right now are somewhere in the middle of something. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're cooking or folding laundry, or sitting on a porch watching the evening come in. Maybe you're doing something you do every day that feels a little better with a story in your ear. That's what Forever on the Frontier is for. If this story is keeping you company today, leave a like. It means more than you know. And tell me in the comments, what are you doing right now while you listen? I genuinely afternoon in June. He rode out alone and stood beside the young man and looked out at the herd spread across the south pasture. For a while, neither of them spoke. Samuel had learned, in 65 years, that some conversations needed silence before they were ready. I've been watching you, Samuel said. Luke kept working. I know, he said. Samuel looked at him. You knew? I noticed some things, Luke said. He set down the tool he was holding and looked at Samuel directly. The money in the tack room, the horses, the cattle sale with the expense accounting. I didn't know why, but I knew you were paying attention. And you acted the same anyway, Samuel said. There's only one way I know how to act, Luke said. Samuel looked at the cattle. Abigail, he said. Luke was very still. I've seen the way she looks at you, Samuel said, and the way you don't look at her, or try not to. He looked at Luke. I want to know why. The Wyoming afternoon held them both. A hawk crossed the sky above the south pasture. Luke looked at the fence for a long moment. Then he said it, directly, the way he said everything. I can't offer your daughter much, Mr. Whitmore. His voice was steady. His eyes were not.
I have a horse and a saddle and wages. No land. No family name. No money that isn't already spoken for by next month's living. He looked at the cattle. A woman like Abigail deserves better than a man who can't give her anything but his word. Samuel Whitmore looked at this young man. The worn clothes, the calloused hands, the blue eyes that told the truth even older. Luke, he said, you're the most honest man in Wyoming. Luke looked at him. He did not yet understand what that meant. That's not a compliment, Samuel said quietly. That's an answer to a question I've been asking for 4 months. He did not say it all at once. That was not Samuel's way. He invited Luke to the main house that evening. They sat on the porch where Samuel had watched him stop for the old hand with the cut hand, the observation that had started everything. The Wyoming evening went from gold to amber to the deep blue of the mountains at dusk. Samuel took the notebook from his pocket and set it on the table between them. He did not open it. 4 months, he said. Everything I observed. Everything you did when you didn't know anyone was watching. Luke looked at the notebook. I am 65 years old, Samuel said. My heart is not what it was.
The doctor in Laramie has told me things I have not repeated to anyone. He paused. I need to know that what I have built here will be in good hands. Not because of the land or the money. Those are just things. He looked at Luke steadily. Abigail is the only thing I built that actually matters. Mr. Whitmore, I'm not asking you to be rich, Samuel said. I'm not asking you to have land or a family name. I'm asking you to be honest. He met Luke's eyes. You've been honest every day for 3 years without anyone asking you to, without anyone watching. A pause. Except me. Luke said nothing for a moment. Sir, he said, years. Not with all of this. He gestured at the ranch, the cattle, the land, the north fence standing 3 miles away in the dark. I have watched you return $30 that wasn't yours, handle my horses like they were made of something precious, account for every expense on a 3-day trip to Laramie, and build a fence that 3 men said couldn't be built, and leave a note about the leftover wire. He looked at Luke with the eyes of a man who has made the most important decision of his remaining years. Go talk to my daughter, he said. Tonight. Luke looked at the notebook on the table between them, then at the man across from him. Yes, sir, he said. He stood. He picked up his hat. At the porch steps, he stopped. Mr. Whitmore, he said. Yes, Samuel said. Thank you, Luke said, for watching. Samuel looked at the mountains going dark. Thank you, he said, for being worth watching. He found her in the garden at the east side of the house. She looked up when she heard the gate. She had known something was happening, had watched from the kitchen window as her father rode out to the south fence, had waited with the patience of someone who trusts the process even when she cannot see it. She looked at Luke. He stood at the garden gate with his hat in his hands. Your father talked to me, he said. I know, she said. Luke stopped. He looked at the hat, then at her. I told him I couldn't offer you much. He said something I've been thinking about since. He looked at her with the blue eyes that had been honest his whole life. Abigail, I have been keeping my distance for a year because I thought it was the right thing. Because I thought you did. Father made me understand that maybe I was measuring with the wrong ruler. Abigail set down what she was holding. She walked to the gate. She stood in front of him. Luke, she said, I watched you stop for an old man with a cut hand on a Tuesday morning when you didn't know anyone was looking. She looked at him with the green eyes that had been paying attention for a year. I was at the upstairs window. You never knew. I don't need much. I need honest. He looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had been watching him the way her father had been watching him, with the same careful attention and the same understanding of what actually mattered. He reached out and took her hand. She held it with the naturalness of something that has been ready for a long time. I can do honest, he said. I know, she said. You've been doing it since before I started watching. He almost smiled. How long have you been watching? Longer than you have, she said. And she smiled, the real one, the one that arrived without warning. And the Wyoming evening held them both in the garden her mother had planted 30 years ago, and it was, without question, exactly right. They were married in September of 1887. Samuel stood beside his daughter at the altar with the expression of a man who has completed the most important work of his life and knows it. 65 years old, his heart doing what the doctor had warned, and he stood straight and gave her hand to Luke Walker with the dignity of someone transferring something precious to someone who will take care of it. Luke said his vows directly, without decoration, looking at Abigail the whole time. Abigail said hers, looking at him with those green eyes that were not going to stop paying attention. Year than it had in the previous 3. The years moved the way good years do. Samuel had good years and harder years. His heart did what the doctor had said, not suddenly, not cruelly, but gradually. He rode less. Then he sat on the porch more. Then, in the winter of 1891, he stopped going further than the porch. Luke came to him every evening. He sat and talked about the ranch, what had been done, what needed doing, what the cattle looked like. Not because Samuel could do anything about it anymore, because it was his ranch, and he had a right to know. Luke understood this without being told. He brought the information the way he brought everything, honestly, completely, without softening what was difficult. Samuel listened. He asked questions that were the questions of a man whose mind was still entirely present even as the body made its preparations. And when Luke left each evening, Samuel sat in his chair and looked at the Wyoming night and thought, "I chose correctly." That was the thought he returned to in those last years. Not the cattle prices or the land values or what the name Whitmore had meant in 3 counties. That one thought. I chose correctly. The boy was born in the spring of 1892. They named him Samuel. Not Samuel Jr., just Samuel, the same name carried forward. Abigail had suggested it, and Luke had said yes immediately, which was the answer she had expected, and which had made her sit quietly for a moment with her hand over her heart. Samuel Whitmore held his grandson for the first time on a May morning when the Wyoming spring was returning everything that winter had taken, and the old man looked at the boy for a long time. "Samuel," he said, trying the name. The baby looked at him with the unfocused gaze of someone who has just arrived. "He has your eyes," Samuel said to Abigail. "Your mother's eyes." Abigail put her hand on her father's arm. "He has Luke's hands," she said. "Look at them." Samuel looked at the baby's hands, small, curled, the hands of someone who had not yet decided what they would build. He held those hands with one finger. He felt the grip, the reflex of a new person holding on. He looked at Luke, standing at the edge of the porch with the expression of a man trying to contain something very large. "Luke," Samuel said. Luke looked at him. "You did well," Samuel said. Not a compliment, a fact, stated with the precision of a man who has been stating facts accurately for 69 years. "Thank you, sir," Luke said. Samuel looked back at his grandson. "Samuel," he said again, softly. Outside, the Wyoming spring held the ranch. The cattle were where they were supposed to be. The north fence was standing. His daughter was beside him. His grandson was in his arms. And in the drawer of the main house desk, a small leather notebook waited for a boy named Samuel, when he was old enough to understand what his grandfather had known about the man his grandfather had chosen. He died in October of 1892. Not suddenly. He had been preparing the way he prepared for everything. Carefully, completely, without leaving things undone. In the weeks before, he had called Luke to the main house and gone through everything, the accounts, listened with the same attention he brought to everything, and asked the questions of a man who intended to understand what he was being trusted with. On the last evening, he asked to sit on the porch. Luke carried him out. He was not heavy. Luke set him in the chair and put the blanket over him and sat down beside him. Abigail sat on the other side with baby Samuel on her lap. The 4 of them watched the October evening come down over Wyoming. The cattle in the lower pasture. The mountains going from amber to purple. The north fence standing somewhere in the dark, 3 miles of it, true and plumb. Samuel breathed the cold air. "It's a good ranch," he said. "It is," Luke said. "You'll take care of it." "Yes, sir." "And her." "Yes, sir." A long quiet. The baby slept in Abigail's arms. I watched you for 4 months, Samuel said, before I said a word. I know, Luke said. You knew? I figured it out, Luke said. The money in the tack room was the first thing. Samuel made a sound that was the last version of his laugh. Quiet, the real one, the one that had been present since before Luke knew him. And you acted the same anyway. There's only one way I know how to act, Luke said. Samuel was quiet for a while. The October stars were beginning. First one, then several, then the full Wyoming sky opening above the ranch he had built. Luke, Samuel said. Sir? It was enough, Samuel said. What you gave her, it was more than enough. Abigail's hand found Luke's in the dark. Samuel breathed the cold air of his land. He looked at and the ranch was quiet. And in the morning, the cattle were where they were supposed to be, and the north fence was standing, and everything Samuel Whitmore had built was in the hands he had spent 4 months making sure were the right ones. Samuel Whitmore spent 4 months watching a young man who didn't know he was being watched. He left money on a table. He offered his best horses. He sent a man alone to Laramie with a season's worth of cattle and the authority to negotiate. He gave him a fence that 3 men had said couldn't be built, and in every test, Luke Walker passed, not because he knew he was being tested, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because there was only one way he knew how to be. That is the thing about character. It doesn't change when the audience arrives. It simply continues being what it has always been, whether anyone is watching or not. Samuel had built a ranch and a fortune and a name in Wyoming. But he understood, at 65 years old, with his heart making its preparations, that none of those things would outlast him in the way that mattered. What would outlast him was Abigail. And what would take care of Abigail was not land or money or a family name. It was the character of the man beside her. He found that man. He verified that character. He transferred what he had built into honest hands. And he sat on a porch in October and watched the stars come out over Wyoming and was still. There is a kind of wealth that doesn't appear in accounts or land records. It is the wealth of knowing, really knowing, that the people you love are going to be all right. Samuel Whitmore died rich in that way. And somewhere, a boy named Samuel was going to grow up on a ranch that stood because his grandfather watched carefully and chose wisely, and because his father was the most honest man in Wyoming. May God bless each and every one of you who listened today. Until next time, keep riding.